Hello and good morning, everybody. I'll wait for people to join us and then we'll get cracking. So welcome to this week's Learn With Lorna, the 48th. So we're approaching the year, the year of posts. Not too far off. I am not seeing comments. Oh, I am now. Perfect. I thought I was seeing no comments coming in, but now I am. So that's good. Always worried when something happens that makes me think it's not going out normally. So excellent. Nice to see everyone saying hello. Before I go any further, a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, that High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in these events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we are truly grateful for that. And for those of you who have done so, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. At every level of the organisation, it's really appreciated. Nice to see people, Skye, Caithness, Australia, Strathpeffer, lots of different people. So nice to see you all. So this is the final session on February's theme of education and childhood. So I've already covered children in Victorian poor relief records, stories from school logbooks, one specific school, the story of Fort William Public School, and now on to look at going from one school to a much wider education across a much wider area, the area of Skye and Lochalsh. Before I go any further, to say that this is very much a sample. I don't know if any of you are on Twitter and you'll have seen some of the images I put up showing the range of numbers of schools across Skye and Lochalsh, and that was only some of them that I put up. So if you're a teacher or a previous pupil of a particular school, I'm sorry if I don't mention it. There's just so much that I could have picked. So some stories. Okay, so as I've mentioned before, we have 4 archive centres in the Highland Archive Service. We have the Highland Archive and Registration Centre in Inverness, Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick, Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, and Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre in Portree. So obviously largely what I'm going to talk about here are pulled from the collections of our Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre. So if you're not familiar with the area, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the Isle of Skye, but if you're not familiar with the kind of wider area of Skye and Lochalsh, there are 10 parishes in Skye and Lochalsh. So there are 7 in the island of Skye that make up the island of Skye, and then there are 3 in the mainland part of Lochalsh. So I'll tell you the names of the parishes just so we have some kind of structure in our heads. Okay, so the Skye parishes are Bracadale, Duranish, Kilmuir, Portree, Slate, Snizort and Strath. So those make up the Isle of Skye. And then in the Lochalsh part of the area, we have Kintail, Lochalsh and Glenshiel parishes. And we'll see as we come through the talk how interesting it is that those kind of very west coast parishes actually border on some that are much more central to the geography of the Highlands. So we'll talk about that in a second. So my aim is to try and to represent as far as I could bits from different areas of the area of Skye and Lochalsh. And I wanted to start with some early schools. So you'll know from last week, and I'm sure you'll know anyway, that education, of course, didn't start with the Education Act. And in fact, in 1616, the Privy Council of Scotland passed an act which required each parish to establish a school within its boundaries. So that was 1616, as is sometimes the case, not always. It took a little bit longer for that to reach the Highlands and for what was theory to actually become fact in the Highlands. And so in 1793, the first statistical accounts, which we've talked about previously, which kind of summarise life in each parish, the first statistical account for the parish of Kintail on the mainland reports that there was a parochial school at Crowside, that there was another at Glenelshig, and which was supported by the tenants who lived in the area. And there was the hope of a third school being established by the SSPCK. So that had happened about 200 years, nearly 200 years after that act had been put into place by the Privy Council. But this varied because, so that was the parish of Kintail. The statistical account for the parish of Strath reads like this. There's a parochial school where reading, writing, arithmetic and Latin are taught. The salary and scholars' fees may amount to about £22 annually. The number of scholars attending in winter is about 60, in number scarce the half of that. An additional school is much needed in this parish. So you can see that Kintail had 2 with hopes of a third. Strath had 1 with hopes of a second, and interesting to note that the numbers dropped by around 50% in the summer because, of course, pupils would be tied up in agriculture and so on. But the statistical account for the parish of Kilmuir has no mention of any school in it at all. So that's not to say there absolutely wasn't one, but it would be very unusual for a statistical account not to reference a school within the parish boundaries. So you can see that there's a really varied state of education across the Skye and Lochalsh area at the time the first statistical account was taken in the 1790s. Although it's interesting to note, although Kilmuir parish mentions no school, it does go on to say that the principal farmers in the area are very well educated. So it doesn't go on to say how, but it does reference it. They obviously thought that was worth making a note of. So in the early 1800s, in addition to the parish schools, which were established in as far as possible in each parish, and the SSPCK schools, which we've spoken about before, that's the Scottish Society for the Propagating of Christian Knowledge, there was also a large number of schools in Skye and Lochalsh that were being run by Gaelic school societies, and this is really interesting. So the society in Edinburgh for the support of Gaelic schools was established in 1811. And the purpose of this organisation was to gratuitously teach the inhabitants of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland to read the scripture in their own language. So it's another really interesting thing of that kind of people having a cause, the people in the Central Belt having a cause that in the Highlands and Islands. They estimated the population of the Highlands and Islands to be about 400,000 and noted that out of those, about 300,000 couldn't read in any language and could only speak Gaelic. I think it's not the Gaelic is the issue there. It's the inability to read that they find the problem. And so there's a belief that if the inability to read leads to ignorance, and then the ignorance was naturally followed by sin and immorality. So the aim was to teach people to read the scripture in Gaelic. And so they set up schools which were peripatetic. So the teachers would do a few months in one place, establish a system of people, learning the basics of reading, and then move on to another area, so that they were kind of spreading that education out. And it's really interesting to note that between 1812 and 1820, there were over 40 of these Gaelic Society schools across Skye and Lochalsh, probably for varying lengths of time, but that's a substantial number. And the annual reports for this organisation are held by the National Library of Scotland, and they can be read online. So if you're interested in the subject, type it into a search engine and you'll get the annual reports up of this organisation. And they're really fascinating because they contain information about the lists of the schools that they've established, the teachers who are teaching, the finances of the schools, and appeals for subscriptions, which of course at this time go across the world. So there's appeals across the Caribbean, across different areas that there would be British or Scottish people living in that they thought they could appeal to for the increase in Christian knowledge and teaching. So I wanted to read an example from the annual report of 1812, which was about the school of Clachan. So this reads: Clachan, in the district of Eastside, parish of Kilmuir, Isle of Skye. The teacher has been employed for one summer session, viz. 3 months, from the 15th day of June to the 15th of September. The number of scholars has increased to 104, of which 14 are between 35 to 40 years of age, 32 between 15 and 26, and 58 are children. So really interesting that range of ages that are being taught. And if this is some people's first chance at an education, you can see that they're kind of grabbing that with both hands. Yes, I will certainly share the link, Fiona, no problem. And it goes on to read, by the accounts I have, says a correspondent, the Reverend John Shaw of Durinish, the school in Kilmuir is doing charmingly. I cannot be particular as I speak from reports, but the report is delightful and animating. I find it has reached the common people here, where I trust it will have the happiest effects. The teachers were only supposed to teach to read the scripture. So they weren't supposed to hold sermons, they weren't supposed to interpret the scripture, they weren't supposed to give any kind of doctrinal opinions or anything like that. They were only supposed to enable people to read the scripture for themselves. And it's interesting because some people did breach that and held sermons or held public meetings about the content and were removed for doing so, which I find really interesting given that religion and the pursuance of religion was the driving force behind the establishment of the schools. But you can see the importance of the schools to these communities because, as I said, that you can see the age range of people who are taking part. And there's a lovely letter from 1813, which appears in the 1813 annual report. And it again is from the Reverend John Shaw, and this is how it reads. Dated 13th of April, 1813. Your school, which was so lately settled at, I think it's Coshlader. If you live there, please correct me. Considering that this is the least populous district of the parish, the school succeeds far beyond my expectations. You must know that this is one of the busiest time in the year, and yet there are already 76 on the list of the school, almost all of which attend regularly one part of the day, and there is hardly a day passes without additions being made to that number. You can hardly conceive what an interest is excited by this school. Not a moment is the teacher allowed to himself. Even when obliged to come to his house for refreshment, people will be at him to receive instruction. He is employed almost without intermission from 7 in the morning until 10 or 11 at night. In the morning and forenoon, he has mostly children and young people. In the evening, persons of all ages. On Sabbath, also, the school is open morning and evening, and numbers attend. Of the 76 scholars I mentioned, 53 are men and boys, and 23 women and girls. 22 are above 20 years of age, 1 is 56, the rest are from 20 downwards to 5. There is one whole family attending, consisting of a husband, wife, and 3 children. 4 read in the Old Testament, 6 in the New, and in a short time 8 more will be added to this class. It really, I think, gives such a feeling of optimism and joy at the chances that education can bring. And that's something I feel really strongly about. I think it's something that is very, very important. And of course, Skye and Lochalsh's links to Gaelic education, Gaelic medium education have continued because they first of all had Gaelic units and now specific Gaelic medium schools at Slate and at Portree, plus the UHI, part of UHI, the Salmarostig Gaelic medium college for higher education, which teaches degree courses entirely in Gaelic. So that link to the language of the area hasn't disappeared at all. So those are just some examples of education pre-1872. There were, of course, also the parish schools, there were General Assembly schools, SSPCK schools, and schools that were specifically supported by benefactors, landowners, churches, and things like that. And the second statistical account really reflects that increase in education provision. So if you remember the extracts I was pulling there from the 1790s, you can see the gaps where places have got no schools or one school. But you can see a marked increase by the time of the second statistical account in around about the 1840s. Many more schools of different organisations and societies. So for instance, the parish of Lochalsh during the time of the first statistical account had 2 schools, but by the 1830s it had 6 schools with a requirement for more. And you start to see that right through the 1800s, a real move towards education and people being entitled to an education being something that was something that people had a right to. You really see that move through the 1800s, and it is often linked to religion. And I mentioned there the General Assembly schools, and I wanted to read you an extract from an exhibition which was created by the archivists and archive assistants at Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre, and this was their kind of summary of the General Assembly schools, just so that we know what those are as well. In 1824, the Church of Scotland set up a scheme for the provision of education which was particularly directed at the Highlands. So again, a focus on the Highlands and supporting people. A survey of Highland parishes in that year revealed that no fewer than 258 schools were urgently needed. By 1829, so 5 years later, 85 schools were up and running with an estimated attendance of 7,000 scholars. It was intended that these schools should be bilingual in Gaelic-speaking districts, although that was not always carried out in practice. There were several surviving General Assembly schools in Skye and Lochalsh in the 1870s. So there was a list of schools that had been General Assembly schools that still survived at the time of the Education Act. And then they were replaced or taken over. So of course, as you will know by now, if you didn't know it before, and I'm sure many of you did, but from listening to me, you'll know that the big date in education in Scotland is 1872. And so, of course, when the Education Act happened, just like everywhere else in Scotland, there were huge changes and increases in education provision across Skye and Lochalsh. And so I couldn't go past the late 1800s without a couple of references to school logbook entries. I've mentioned school logbooks a lot over the weeks, but they are great for contextual information about an area and all sorts of other reasons. They're good for finding out more about schools which no longer exist, some which closed 100 years ago and some which closed very recently. So an example of that is Borrowdale School. Borrowdale School was one of 6 primary schools in the Glendale area of Skye. In 1905, it had 136 pupils. So 1905, 136 pupils. By the 1940s, it had 25 pupils. And that just gradually dwindled until it eventually closed in 2007. And what's interesting there is that it was, when it closed, was the last of those 6 Glendale schools that had existed. So it's interesting that we go from years and years of trying to increase education provision to a point to where, due to changing demographics, people moving, things like that, the need for schools and the purposes of schools changes a little bit. The Killin School Logbook talks a lot about, of course, various things, but I thought it was interesting that it always notes what songs the pupils are singing. So, for instance, it lists them singing Spring Morning, Maggie's Secret, The Silver Lake, Happy Are We All Together. I don't know any of these. They sing Maggie May as well, which I'm assuming is not the Rod Stewart version. I'm willing to be corrected. But it just goes to show again the long connection to importance of music on the West Coast and on the islands, and the importance of traditional music and being seen as an important part of the curriculum, and we'll come back to that later on. The Dorney School Logbook contains some really interesting entries that show the range of information you can find within school logbooks. So on the 6th of December 1878, it reads, the shock of an earthquake has been felt over the district at 7:15 a.m. on December the 3rd. So an earthquake being felt. And then a couple of months later, the 20th of June 1878, have had to speak very much about tidiness in heads and hair keeping. I don't know if that's just general standards or if that's to do with head lice or nits, or I don't know. But it's just interesting the sort of things that teachers have to deal with, as I'm sure we're all familiar with. An interesting extract from Lochalsh School Logbook from the 17th of December 1875, and it reads, the attendance was good, although the working of the school was very much retarded by bad light. And then the following week's entry shows that it was so dark in the school building that they had to send the pupils home because they just couldn't work. And I think that's really interesting because on one hand, of course, it's utterly obvious. Of course, they didn't have electric lighting in the schools. But I think we forget that sometimes, and I think we forget that the other stories we talk about are set against a backdrop of cold and dark, that those things were concurrent. So all of those other things we hear about were happening within that context. I think sometimes we forget about that. If any of you are, I don't know which page people are watching on, this is going out on all 4 Highland Archive Service pages, but if you follow the Skye and Lochalsh Facebook page, you'll know that recently our trainee archivist Catherine gave an interview to the Scotsman about the changes of electric lighting coming, the electricity coming to the area. And I just think sometimes we can forget about that a wee bit. A reminder before I carry on talking that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, that High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. Moving into the 1900s, there are several really interesting, particularly interesting events that happened across Skye and Lochalsh to do with education, and I wanted just to touch on a couple of those. The 1920s and 30s saw an extensive migration of families from the Western Isles, particularly Harris and Lewis, to North Talisker as part of a migration scheme. And so this, of course, resulted in a large population increase in North Talisker. There were overcrowding in the schools, the existing schools in the area. Plus, for those children that were being settled in that area, it would have been a long distance to walk to those schools. And so many parents just simply didn't send their children to school. And there's a letter here by John McIntyre in Carbost to the Education Authority describing the problem. It's nice as well because it lists the pupils. So he says, Dear Sirs, in relation to your letter of the 22nd, this is November 1923, I have called on the parents of the list you sent me, and they are not going to send their children to Carbost. Those children you refer to are 3.5 and 4 miles from Carbost School. They want a school at Portnalong. They also want a footbridge over the rivers. I enclose a list of the children. And I'll read it because I know whenever I read a list of people's names, people are always excited to see who's on it. So the children he's talking about here are Charles MacLeod, age 9, Mary Mackay, age 13, Neil Mackay, 11, Murdo Mackay, 9, Donald Mackay, 13, John Mackay, 11, Mary Kate Mackay, 7, Kenneth Campbell, 13, Maggie Campbell, 9, Delina Campbell, 7, Donald MacLeod, 9, Murdo MacLeod, 7. And it says not attending any school, 12. And then the additional pupils who will be coming are Donald Mackenzie and Norman Mackenzie. And so to remedy this, there was a lot of kind of complaints about the fact that there wasn't a suitable school. And to remedy this, a new school was opened at Portnalong. Now I say a new school. This was in fact a wooden hut which had been previously used by the Board of Agriculture, but was seen to be enough to serve as a school. So it was not at all suitable for the number of pupils who were due to attend, and it wasn't equipped to act as a school. And there's some really great correspondence files in Skye and Lochalsh that talk about education. And so I wanted to give you this extract from a letter by James Campbell, who was the teacher at the new Portnalong School. And he's writing to Murdo Morrison, who was the Director of Education, in May 1924. I opened this school yesterday, the 19th. I had 19 pupils present. Today I had 26 pupils, but this is not all that are to come. I got a man to go and collect the names of all the children within school age, and the list I received showed that there are 44 children. This hut will comfortably hold 20, so how am I to house the 44? Or if the Fernley children come, about 60. I don't know how I'm supposed to house them. 6 desks arrived, but one of them was so broken up that it couldn't be used. I went to see Miss Macmillan yesterday and managed to get hold of a few books that she wasn't using, but she couldn't spare any slates. I am ordering the books and such things as a blackboard, admission register and logbook, but I really hope these will be supplied soon. So just talking about the difficulties of trying to run a school in these circumstances, which I'm sure will be something that's familiar to people across the world, sadly. So by November of that year, the parents themselves were petitioning the Director of Education for a new school building to be built, which was fit for purpose. They said that the building was overcrowded, there was no fire, so the pupils in winter were just freezing. And then they must have succeeded, because in the 1929 to 30 report on the school, it says, the school was instituted here in 1926, and notwithstanding the exceptional circumstances attending the first years of its existence, a fair measure of success has already been achieved. So a positive outcome for that story. And then in the 1930s, we can see another, in the correspondence files, we can see another crisis unfolding, this time from Dewsdale. And again, it's like something like heat and light that I think we take for granted, that this really wouldn't happen, or if it did happen, it wouldn't go on for a year. So this is his letter from the teacher, again, writing to the Education Authority, writing to the County Council Education Department. Dear Sir, I have repeatedly written to the School Management Committee about the poisoned state of the water at this school since last July, and this is written in May. I do not need to point out the possible consequences of the delay of rectifying this defect. Will you kindly place the matter before your council at their first meeting? Again, just something that he's been writing for months and months and months, that children have access to water that is poisoned, and something that would, that the school would be closed immediately now if that was to happen. Something again that we just take as for granted. So I mentioned before schools coming and going as demand changed and needs changed, came and went. In the 1940s, there are some interesting examples of schools closing for different reasons, not to do with capacity or to do with pupil role. And the construction of the hydro dams really took off in the 1940s across the Highlands. And the construction of the hydro dam at Lochmillerdoch began in 1948. And the resulted flooding that happened as a result of creating the dam joined Lochs Lungard and Lochmillerdoch and submerged the former houses of the estate workers. And as a result of that, the side schools at Lungard and at Benula closed as a result. So quite just a different reason for schools to be closed. And I find it's interesting. It seems very strange to me to talk about Lochmillerdoch because it's near Bewley. So, not that far away from Inverness, but Kilmorrock parish, where Lochmillerdoch sits, borders on to Kintail, Lochalsh and Glenshiel parishes, which stretch right out to the west coast. I'm aware I'm going to run over, so I apologise for those of you who are keen to get on with the rest of your day, but I will try and speed up. So secondary education in Skye and Lochalsh is provided now through two schools, through Ploughton High School and through Portree High School. Portree High School is another one which was constructed in the 1870s, so following the Education Act, a new building was constructed to, of course, the design of Alexander Ross. And we'll come on to talk about Alexander Ross at a later session. It was, as I say, built in the 1870s and then extended 1913 and 1923 due to an increase in pupils. The Margaret Carnegie Hostel for Girls opened in 1924 and the Elgin Hostel for Boys in 1933. And these were hostels that would house pupils who were travelling long distances to attend. So pupils who lived out with the area but needed to attend secondary education would come into the area during the week, attend school during the week and then go home at the weekends, usually at the weekends, sometimes a bit longer. A new building was constructed in the late 1960s for Portree High School and the Victorian building was demolished, but if you go onto Ambala website you will be able to see some pictures of that original building. A further new building was opened in 2008 and it's a lovely high school complex. So I said the Victorian building for the school was demolished, but the Elgin Hostel was not demolished where the boys had stayed. And that is where Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre is now housed. So as I spoke about last week with Lochaber Archive Centre, it's really nice to have our archive centre for an area in a building that we have a connection to and that we know some of the historic stories connected to it. So the renowned and famous and prolific Gaelic poet Sorley MacLean was a pupil at Portree High School. He was one of those pupils who stayed at Portree during the week and then returned to the island of Raasay at the weekends. And he went on then to teach at Portree High School, and also he held office at Salmarostig as well. And he also was an office bearer, held, I think, rector at the public school in Ploughton. So Ploughton was another 1870s Alexander Ross school, and it housed both primary and secondary education until the 1950s, when it became clear that the building was no longer fit for housing both primary and secondary education. And so new facilities were required for secondary education. So a new school was built in Ploughton in the 1960s, And again, it's another key phase of school building. You know, we see this huge range of schools getting built in the 1870s, and then probably, unless anyone can jump in and correct me, I think the next big swathe of schools getting built is the 1960s, or certainly that's another big phase of school building. And like Portree, Plockton High School also had hostel accommodation for those who were travelling a long distance over the area. What's particularly interesting in the story of Plockton High School was the creation in 2000 of the National Centre of Excellence in Traditional Music. This is a dedicated residential school which teaches music, so the pupils will still get normal lessons, but there's a real focus on traditional music and skills of traditional music. It's based at Plockton High School, but serves a much wider community than that, so students come from across the country. Have a look at their website. It's a fascinating organisation, and again just shows that long link to the importance of music and heritage and culture within the area. And that there's a lovely extract on the website by one of the officials connected to the school, saying that they're enabling students to go away and pursue a career in music if they want to, but really what they want to do is people to carry on, the students who leave to carry on carrying their traditional music in their heart, which I thought was particularly nice. So Skye and Lochalsh has, as you can see through these kind of examples, a long connection to education beyond the basic kind of 3 R's. And so I wanted to finish off by mentioning 2 other examples of this within Skye and Lochalsh area, Balmacara and Duncraig. And if anyone watching has any memories of these, please do jump in and tell us. So Balmacara House School in Southwest Ross, have a look at the location, absolutely stunning. It opened in the 1950s, the late 40s, 50s, to provide agricultural and horticultural education to boys aged 16 to 18. So again, yes, there's an importance on standard education, but there's also a swing to different types of subjects, vocational subjects. And so from the late 1940s to the 1970s, the pupils who attended were taught both theory and practical skills such as ploughing, animal husbandry, tractor driving, things like that. And the school had a building to enable the theory to be taught, and also land surrounding it to enable people to do the practical skills. One of the other things that I love about this is that this school, the pupils who were creating, who were working this land, creating produce and so on, went on to supply the produce to their own school. So the catering of the school was run by produce that had been created and grown by pupils, and also they sold their produce into the local community. Again, it's a boarding school, so there was accommodation provided and recreational activities for those who were taking part. And lots of people, if you'll excuse the pun, lots of the pupils went on to work in this field of agriculture. I wrote it down in my notes and I thought, oh, that's terrible. I didn't even mean that. But I wanted to read just for my final thing to read to you today, an extract from the 1949 Balmacara House School magazine. This is written by the principal, and it just gives a feeling. The magazine's lovely. It's got poems and pieces of research written by different pupils. But I wanted to read to you a part that was written by the principal of the school. And he writes, "A pleasing feature of the life of this school has been the various impromptu ceilidhs conducted by the pupils themselves. No doubt this sprang from Mrs. MacLeod's very enjoyable music lessons. The school is greatly indebted to Mr. Reid, headmaster of Kyle Public School, for continuing to conduct instruction in woodwork. This pleasant and profitable association will not continue beyond the present school year, as a technical teacher has now been appointed. Probably the most important development of this session has been the approval of plans to establish a farm to be run in conjunction with the school, and on which the pupils will learn and practice modern methods of agriculture. This extensive scheme, which is due to begin soon, will provide a dairy herd and a modern dairy, a flock of hill sheep and arable cropping, with poultry as a sideline, and will greatly enhance the value of the school course. Last year's cropping produced encouraging results. For example, the school produced all the potatoes consumed during the session. Plans are in hand for an increased number of pupils next session who can look forward to improved facilities both on the instructional and domestic sides of the school. So a really interesting project looking at vocational training. And in a similar vein was Duncraig School. And I'm already seeing people saying that Lily, your sister, went to Duncraig School. Duncraig Castle sits near Plockton. It was built in the 1860s as a mansion. I'm not going to give you any prizes for guessing who the architect was behind Duncraig Castle, because it was, of course, Alexander Ross. Built as a house, then went on to be used during the Second World War as a Royal Naval Hospital, and some great images again on Ambala of the medical staff outside the castle. It then came into the hands of Inverness County Council and was turned into a domestic science college for girls. And it remained as a domestic science college until 1989. So again, that vocational training for going on to do practical things. It now has returned to being a private house. It's a hotel. It's a wedding venue, and I'm seeing people saying that they have been there and that it had great food. So I hope that I've done some justice to the area there. As I say, there was so much I could have talked about, but a long history of education in Skye and Lochalsh, a long connection to the Gaelic language and the education using Gaelic as a medium of education. Varied education, vocational, forward-thinking ways of teaching people in skills as well as in standard education. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I am sorry I've run over by 7 minutes. I hope you can join me next week. Next week we'll be moving on to the next month's theme, and that theme is stories and illustrations. So I'm excited for that on the basis that basically everything we hold in our collection is full of stories. So next week's talk will be on authors who appear in our collections across our 4 offices. So I hope you can join me for that. Thank you for listening today, and a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in these events. Thank you so much.